Part 74. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 742. Clang. 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 The sound of gongs and drums were constantly intertwined. On the outside, there was a circle of villagers standing and watching the fun, while inside, there were a few Taoist priests in fancy clothes running in circles. There are a total of 5 Taoist priests, and each of them has an animal embroidered on his clothes. If you look into the details, it is actually one of the 9 sons of the dragon, such as Daodi and Yaij-Han. They wear cloud crowns on their heads and wear wooden clogs on their feet. It's also impressive when you get up. The one who hit the front was a fat man, holding a mahogany sword and mumbling something. Behind him were people holding rice bowls and some holding portraits of the ancestors. In short, the ceremony was very formal, and the surrounding villagers had an unclear feeling. A feeling of. There was a video circulated before, showing a monk banging wooden fish and reciting sutras at a funeral, but it turned out to be to the tune of Doraemon, so naturally this team of white-collar workers worked hard to recite sutras in one go. It is the Taoist scripture of the 8 genuine scriptures. They walked down the circle after another, followed by some other rituals. In the end, the leading fat man stabbed the peachwood sword on the talisman paper and waved it. The talisman paper burned automatically. The surrounding villagers cheered loudly. They felt that this Taoist priest was obviously better than before. The Taoist priest who sees nothing is really capable. At least he can do tricks. After a lot of twists and turns, the fat man finally shouted with his sword, "Send Mr. He to ride a crane in peace, and be ranked as a god in the heavenly palace." The villagers below cheered together, and many even clapped. One of them, a middle-aged man with a fat head and big ears and wearing a suit, nodded with satisfaction. Although hiring this white-collar team is more expensive, but he does have 2 more tricks. He is not short of money anyway. Since his father is gone, he naturally has to organize the funeral in a glorious way and let the people in the village see that he can be considered a figure now. The performance, oh no, after the religious ceremony was over, the banquet was about to start. The host arranged for the fat man and others to sit at the same table as the music team. There were 5 people on the Taoist side and 8 people on the music team. The big round table could accommodate them. Down. However, unlike the Taoist priests who were all very impressive, the faces of the people in the music team were very ugly. The reason was very simple. Although they were called the music team in the past, in fact they were also contracted to do the religious work. The traditional funeral process in the rural areas of central Jiangsu is now like this. When someone in the family dies, a music band is invited. In the morning, the people in the music band change into Taoist or monk clothes and start performing rituals in a serious manner. In the afternoon, I started to hold country karaoke concerts. I took a microphone and turned on the stereo and started singing, dancing, and even performing in operas. After all, except for the host and a few close relatives who are very sad about the death of the deceased, most of the guests who come to the banquet are actually just doing errands and related to relatives. Although there is no emotion or much contact, they still have to people come to the venue and pay a share, and they have a meal at noon and a meal at night. We can't say that everyone is stupidly mourning with the host's family. Naturally, they have to have some fun. The music band will satisfy everyone's entertainment. In the afternoon at that time, everyone gathered around the dam, listened to the music and watched the performance. After the performance, it was almost time to have the dinner party. But now, most of the music team's errands have been robbed by these Taoist priests, and the rituals during the day are the most expensive, and the host will also give a big funeral red envelope. The fat man who was the leader among the Taoist priests rolled up his sleeves and ate happily. The other Taoist priests originally wanted to show off, but when they saw that the boss was eating so freely, they let go. Nowadays, the noodles made in rural areas are definitely no worse than those in hotels. Although the price is much cheaper, the food is definitely expensive. After finishing the meal, the fat man took off his Taoist priest clothes and sat there in a white shirt, blowing in the wind. On this day, it was really hard to wear Dobeo-made Taoist robes. The music band over there was already preparing to set up the venue, and several people were testing microphones. Hey, 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 hey. The villagers who had finished their lunch also gathered spontaneously, ready to enjoy the country karaoke. Okay, to start singing. Brother Bai. A Taoist priest trotted over, leaned next to the fat man and said, "His name is Xiao Litzi, he is from Sichuan, he came to work in Jiangsu province, and he was stupidly cheated out of his wages. He sat on the roadside crying, and the fat man took him to his side. The person in charge of this family said that we have to come over during the first 7 and 5 weeks, and the deposit has been paid." The little Taoist wisely stuffed the money into the fat man's pocket. The fat man nodded, indicating that he understood. "Grandma, I haven't sung for a long time, let's go sing one too." The fat man squeezed his way through the crowd and entered the music band's infield. "Come on, Master Deo, can I sing a song too?" the fat man said to the leader of the music team. "Sure, come on." Although the leader of the music team is very unhappy with these Taoist priests who are robbing their jobs, he is not that ignorant of how to behave. To be honest, people who do idle business are better at doing things, because this industry, if you say the wrong thing, you will be beaten up by the master and you will have no place to say anything wrong. The fat man went to choose the song first, then put the song into the old-fashioned player, then held up the microphone and said, "Fathers and fellow villagers, Mr. He has gone to the west of Hexi to become a god in the sky. Let's not be too sad, and don't be too sad. Everyone should look at it a little bit. I know in my heart that Mr. He is still grateful for everyone's support today. In the face of mourning, Mr. He will also miss Taoism in heaven, and he will miss his own son, our boss He." Music sounded at this time. Although the sound of the large speaker was not very clear, it was definitely enough in this empty place. The fat man spoke into the microphone and began to sing. "Find some free time, find some time. Take your children with you and go home often. Bring a smile, bring wishes. Accompany your lover and go home often to visit." The people in the music band nearby looked as if they had seen a ghost. Did they ask the dead Mr. He to go home often? But when they saw Mr. He's son, He Ergu, actually applauded after Fatty finished singing, and even came out to sing with Fatty with another microphone, the people in the music team really breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Touch What He arrived was a brainless upstart, otherwise he would really be afraid of being implicated by the stinky fat man. The concert was noisy until 3:30 in the afternoon. The fat man asked a few people to put on their clothes again and followed the hearse to the crematorium. The rural areas in Jiangsu are more strictly controlled and burials are strictly prohibited. If you are caught, even if you have already been buried, they will also be forced to dig them out and cremate them again. In the car, other Taoist priests fired their kicks and threw them out, and then shouted words like "the soul is back" and "have a good journey." The little Taoist priest next to the fat man suddenly complained, "Brother Bai, I heard that some places allow burials, saying that they respect their customs." Bullshit. When it comes to burial, who among the Han people has attached great importance to burial since ancient times? In the past, when our ancestors died, they were pushed out to the crematorium. The fat man lit a cigarette and gave one to the Taoist priests around him. The little Taoist priest also wanted to be glared at by the fat man and retracted his hand. The fat man blew out a smoke ring and said, "If we can still be buried now, we can make money faster. Choose the tomb and style based on Feng Shui. That's the most profitable place." What a pity. After all, the fat man still cares about money. The funeral procession stopped under the number 2 bridge and drove into the funeral parlor. He Ergu, a dutiful son, was carrying the black and white portrait of his father. The fat man and the staff of the funeral parlor pushed the ice coffin forward. When they got inside, the people at the funeral home stopped Fatty from interfering, so Fatty took a few steps back, followed by a team of relatives headed by He Ergu. I said, "Boss you are crying." The fat man winked. There were relatives standing behind him. "Your father is about to turn into ashes. Why don't you even shed a tear?" But, I can't cry," He Ergu said anxiously. The fat man sighed, and calmly reached out and pinched He Ergu's butt. He Ergu was so painful that he burst into tears immediately. "My dad, why did you leave like this? What do you want my son to do?" He Ergu cried out, and the relatives behind him immediately joined in the cry, and some rushed over to stop the ice coffin from being pushed into the incineration room. Of course, this was just for show, otherwise the funeral parlor would only have to work. The staff just let go and said, "Okay, I won't cremate the body and send it to your home to see who would want it. Today's work is completely finished." The fat man clapped his hands, walked outside, and lit another cigarette. The little Taoist priest walked up to the fat man and said, "Brother Bai, what are you thinking about?" "Look, what's floating out of that chimney," the fat man said, pointing to the chimney. "Human ashes," the little Taoist replied. "Shit, that's the ash from the oil sprayed in the incinerator. The old man was just a skeleton when he died. How could he produce so much ash and smoke?" "Oh, that's how it is." "Little Plum, you are so stupid," the fat man said. "I'm stupid," the little Taoist admitted. "Kwawazi, do you know what your greatest advantage is?" "What is it?" "Knowing that you are stupid and admitting that you are stupid means you are smarter than most people in this world. From now on, you can lead the team. I will teach you everything I should teach you." "Brother Bai, are you leaving?" The little Taoist seriously took out his mobile phone and played "Can't Say Goodbye" by Alan Tam. The fat man put his foot on the little Taoist priest's butt and buttocks. "What a fool, play God of Gamblers" to the fat man. The little Taoist priest immediately searched for the theme song of God of Gamblers and played it. The fat man laughed loudly, and slowly turned around and walked towards the incineration room in the God of Gamblers BGM very coquettishly. He stretched out his hand and took out the wad of money he just got today from his pocket. He threw it into the sky casually, and for a moment, RMB were flying, but they were not ghost coins. As Fatty walked along, neither the staff at the funeral home nor He Ergu's relatives seemed to see him. The fat man walked into the incineration room and lay down on the conveyor belt. "Brother Bai, can you please stop burning yourself?" The little Taoist priest slapped the glass and shouted. Immediately, a staff member came over to pull the little Taoist priest away, thinking that the young man had lost his mind. "Then we have to discuss it with my wife," the fat man shouted back. "But you are a bachelor." The little Taoist priest was carried out by the security guard. A little Taoist priest suddenly went crazy in the funeral parlor. This was another supernatural incident in the funeral parlor. Then, there's no need to discuss it. The fat man laughed at himself, then pressed down with his fingers, and several buttons in the distance were automatically pressed. The incinerator conveyor belt on Fatty's side began to move. The fat man lying on it stretched out. It's time to go back and rebuild. This chapter should be read and appreciated. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 743. When the plane landed, Subai turned his head slightly and looked out the window. It looked like the Dali airport located on a hill. It was a very small airport, far less grand than the airports in other big cities in China, but it seemed to be getting better. It captures the temperament and style of Dali and is just right. Then he lowered his head and looked at Jixiang lying on his lap. Subai reached out and rubbed its head. Jixiang had been killed by touching his head countless times recently. At first, Jixiang resisted, but the resistance was ineffective. We can only let it go, but every time Subai strokes Subai like a pet cat, Ji Xiang's eyes always look very helpless. Subai also knew in his heart that regardless of whether Jixiang indicated it or not, even if this guy was not a monster in this life, but a domestic cat, he would probably have the same virtue. After getting off the plane, the pickup car Subai booked was right at the entrance of the airport. You can see it as soon as you exit the terminal door. A small airport also has the advantages of a small airport. It is really convenient to get in and out. After getting in the car, Subai still held Ji Xiang in his arms. He knew what he was going to do. Obviously, the man and the woman should also know that. In front of the man and the woman, he was unable to resist. The fact that the Fang family can come and go freely even when there are people around speaks for itself. Therefore, Subai could only keep good luck on himself. If something unexpected happened again, he would be responsible for it along with his own life. Subai thought about this very clearly. Even if he is a puppet, he still has a temper. Suddenly, looking at the blue sky and white clouds outside the window, Subai felt a little sad. Both the monk and the Buddha said that his mental willpower was abnormal, but in fact, his family knew about his affairs, and he was just confused by one after another. It's just twisted. It was still Kayakan, the same place where he stayed last time. But when Subai got off the bus at Kayakan Pier, he found that the town here was much deserted. The restaurant called Nanzai Yuan was still open. It could be seen that it was recently renovated. Subai remembered that the last time he had a big fight with a few Western listeners, he basically tore through their backyard and made it difficult for the boss. Originally, Subai wanted to stay at the B/U0026B where he stayed last time, but unfortunately, due to recent renovations on Erhai Lake, most of the B/U0026Bs and inns on Erhai Lake were forced to close and temporarily open. Subai had no choice but to give up the idea of settling down for the time being. Anyway, he didn't bring anything to pay homage to, and he didn't even bring any clothes. There was only a black cat beside him, and it was no big deal even if he slept in the open air. After renting a battery car, Subai put Jixiang in the basket in front of the car, and then Subai set off towards the location of the village in his memory. The scenery on the Erhai Lake was certainly beautiful, and we met several couples taking wedding photos on the road, but neither Subai nor Ji Xiang seemed to be in the mood to appreciate the beautiful scenery. Jixiang was lying in the basket and yawning constantly, like a black meatball, trembling as the electric car drove, which was quite naive. When approaching the village, Subai slowed down the battery car. In fact, Subai knew one thing very well, that is, the last time he took the little one to Dali for a trip, Jixiang also came with him, but Jixiang did not show the emotion of being more timid when close to hometown, nor did he go home to visit. Plan, so it can be basically concluded that Jixiang does not want to return to that place. More than 20 years ago, Jixiang was coaxed out by Su Yuhang. Even when he returned here with Subai a while ago, he had no intention of going back. Obviously, in Jixiang's view, the outside world is more important. Wonderful. But it might also be because Jixiang had little ones around him at that time that he needed to take care of, and now. Subai looked at Jixiang who was still crawling in the basket. Although he had to admit that he could need this meatball at any time and treat it completely like a pet cat. It was really satisfying to see it trying to resist but was unable to resist, but Jixiang should still restore it to its former self. The sight of him biting fresh milk and looking around in confusion at 10 o'clock yesterday hurt Subai's heart. In fact, it is his responsibility to recover Jixiang. After all, Jixiang has been with him since he killed Roadhog or slapped away the ghost of the boy in red. These things seem a bit overbearing, but Jixiang has helped him take care of his children for such a long time, and even saved his face out of consideration for the little one. Judging from the past few years of getting along with Jixiang, he has indeed enjoyed Jixiang's convenience. More. Picking Ji Xiang up from the basket, Subai planned to take a look at the village first. Although he estimated that the entrance was probably not here anymore. After all, the last time he came out, he emerged from the Erhai Lake, but at least he could go and have a look. Clues, and the audience in Yunnan obviously know much more about the place of enlightenment than the audience in other places, so there should be new clues on their side. At the entrance of the village, the group of tombs still looked so dazzling. Black and white photos of young children were posted on the tombstones. Ordinary people might find it unlucky, and people with a little sentimentality might find it sad. But for Subai, it means another feeling, but a kind of relief, because it is Subai who avenges these children who died young. When that thing entered a snake's body, Buddha wanted to take it back and study it, but Subai still insisted on blowing it up with one punch. There is still a group of old people sitting there at the entrance of the village, their eyes blank. They are actually waiting to die. Although the culprit who has poisoned the village for so many years has been eliminated by Subai, the poison that thing has caused to the village for so many years has actually made the village exist in name only to a certain extent. Maybe in another 10 years, this village will it really only exists in file records. Subai, a stranger, walked in and failed to arouse the interest of these old men. However, when Subai just entered the village, a young man squatting on the ground playing marbles appeared in front of him. Ji Xiang, who was curled up in Subai's arms, suddenly trembled, raised his head, and stared at the young man in front of him with his cat eyes. "I know, he is a ghost." Subai smiled bitterly. Once upon a time, Jixiang would slap anyone who dared to approach him, whether it was a demon or a ghost, but now he seemed a little nervous. The young man seemed to have heard Subai's footsteps. He raised his head, looked at Subai, and sniffed. Every place has its own feng shui. According to Fatty's previous explanation, it is the magnetic field or qi of a place. All the healthy young adults in this village have left, leaving only the aging old people here. In addition, these years have been that thing sucked blood and caused many children and women to die. Naturally, the feng shui of the village deteriorated, and it was normal for some sinister things to appear. One person and one ghost looked at each other for a long time, and the young man suddenly smiled. His smile was very bright. It was interesting for a ghost to smile so brightly. Subai slowly squatted down and placed Ji Xiang at his feet. The young man did not come over, but took a step back. He pointed at the marbles at his feet and sniffed again. Then, the young man grinned again, and his body began to slowly turn into nothingness, and then dissipated. This is an episode without beginning or end, because even though Subai, a senior audience member, was standing right in front of him, he still couldn't figure out what this kid was going to do. Not every ghost is like the boy in red and knows how to repay a favor. In fact, Subai punched that thing to death. These ghosts who were killed by that thing probably have no way of knowing that they are ghosts after all, and not the Dulugo Jinxian in the sky. Meow. Ji Xiang suddenly shouted, broke away from Subai's arms, and walked over by himself. Subai also walked over. There were a few marbles on the ground, but these marbles were obviously old and their color was already a little faded. Lucky Paws fiddled with marbles. Let's go and take a look at the front. Subai walked forward as he spoke. Ji Xiang glanced at the marbles again with some reluctance, and continued to follow Subai's footsteps. There was still a tacit understanding of one person and one cat. When they arrived at the place where they originally entered, there was only a pit, and there was nothing strange around it. Subai still remembered the scene where the monk, the local Yunnan audience, and the Western audience worked together to open the entrance to the magic circle, but at this time, it is obvious that there is something different about things and people. Sighing, there really weren't any clues to get here. Subai was already considering whether he needed to contact the audience forum administrator who gave him his business card and ask him to help him find out the information. At most, he promised to owe him a favor. However, Just when Subai took out his cell phone, he saw Jixiang running in the direction he came from again. Subai didn't dare to let Jixiang get too far away from him, so he had to continue to follow him, where Jixiang was playing marbles again. This cat. Although Subai felt that Jixiang was very comfortable as his pet, to be honest, he really didn't want to see Jixiang become a pet cat that needed cat toys. That would also be an insult to Jixiang. Meow. 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 Jixiang shouted at the marbles. What's wrong? Subai squatted down again, and Jixiang said meow again. Subai took a closer look at the marbles placed on the ground. Jixiang's blurred shadow was reflected in the marbles. Subai's eyesight was enhanced by the blood of the blood clan. The eyesight is much better than that of ordinary people. Meow. But when Jixiang barked again, Subai keenly discovered that the black cat in the marbles did not open its mouth. Subai picked up the marbles and looked at the air. Now, everything was clear and distinct, because the shadow of the black cat still there. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 744. Although there is an old saying that goes well, good people are rewarded, but Subai still doesn't believe that the reason for all this is because he helped avenge the children who died young here. Things that have reached this level, ordinary lonely ghosts, it is really difficult to play any role in it. Subai can see this clearly. If he was a scholar who went to Beijing to take the exam and got lost in the woods, and a kid came out to show him the way and help him escape, that would make sense, but now the people involved, whether it is Subai or Ruyi, or the person lying in the coffin at the place of enlightenment, are not existences that a kid can connect together. The black cat in the glass marble just looked at Subai calmly. Although many things were still unclear, Subai's burden seemed to have been lifted by more than half. No matter what, at least he was now connected to the place of enlightenment. There is no need to find other people or contact local audiences in Yunnan to request information. In fact, it's right to think about it. Although according to him, the person lying in the coffin at the place of enlightenment was tricked by Su Yuhang, which made him seem to be able to only exist in the coffin. After all, he was with Su Yuhang. A person of this period has never left by train. He is more disciplined than Liang Senator. He cannot be said to be timid, but at least it can be said that he is very disciplined. For such a character, it is really hard to say that he can't reach out to the place of enlightenment. Then no one believes it. Ruyi! Ruyi! Subai shouted to the marbles. The black cat in the marble was still motionless. If Subai hadn't caught the black cat's eyes moving slightly, he might have been afraid that this was just a fixed projection. So, now the question is, how should I go to the place of enlightenment? Meow. At this time, Jixiang suddenly stretched out his claws and scratched Subai's pants. Subai lowered his head, looked at Jixiang, and then placed the marble in front of Jixiang. Jixiang stretched out his claws and rubbed the marble for a while, then raised it and slapped it on the marble. Then, nothing happened. Meow meow. Jixiang seemed very angry, slapping his paws at the marbles, like an angry cat. At first, Subai thought Jixiang was competing with Ruyi in the glass marbles, just like an ordinary silly dog that kept barking at himself in the mirror, but soon Subai discovered something was wrong. Jixiang should not be in competition, because even if he loses his memory, Jixiang will not suddenly become like a silly cat. Subai stretched out his hand to move Jixiang away, and then stepped on the glass marble. The marble immediately shattered. Then, the wind suddenly started blowing around, and a vortex appeared on the ground under his feet. The vortex appeared very suddenly, and it looked like a whirlpool. The look seems to disappear quickly. Without much hesitation, Subai jumped in with Jixiang in his arms. Bang! Bang. 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 This is like a kind of array transmission, but it is undoubtedly much worse than the white light that is transmitted every time the broadcast is transmitted into the story world. After all, when the broadcast is transmitted, you may be lying in bed sleeping without knowing it, and you are already in the story when you wake up. The world, and if Subai's physique hadn't been so amazing during this teleportation, even the fat man or the monk would probably have been seriously injured when he teleported to the destination. Puff. When he came out, a huge acceleration acted on Subai's body. Subai held Jixiang in both hands, his back touched the ground, and then rubbed against the ground with a crash sound. The friction distance was estimated to be nearly 100 years. Rise. Clang. Finally, Subai's back hit a hard object hard, and then he stopped. He let go of his hand, and Jixiang walked down unharmed, but Subai gritted his teeth. Damn, I don't know how many bones were broken in his body, and the flesh and blood on his back was probably worn away, and the bones must have come out. Hee hee. Behind Subai, there was a chuckle. Subai turned around and realized that the thing he hit on his back was the coffin. Subai was naturally very familiar with this coffin. When he was trapped here, this coffin would release a ray of corpse energy every day. Absorb it yourself. Naturally, he recognized the coffin, so there was no need to say more about who made the laughter. I'm back, Subai said. I remember that when I was here for more than a month, Subai often talked to himself in front of the coffin. Because the person in the coffin basically didn't respond, Subai just said it. It was relaxing, but it had only been more than half a year. When he returned here again, it was difficult for Subai to speak in a relaxed and joking tone. Meow. Jixiang shouted to the side of the coffin. Soon, a similarly black cat came out. This cat was very similar to Jixiang, but there were some differences in the color of their coats. Jixiang's coat was smoother and brighter, while Ruyi's looked heavier. In addition, Jixiang's coat looked heavier. His eyes were clear and cold, while Ruyi was completely solemn. Oh, there was a response from the coffin, still as concise as before, but this time there was an extra sentence, why go out? Hearing this, Subai was silent. Yes, why go out? The man in the coffin originally didn't intend to let him out, but he still insisted on going out because Subai didn't want the little guy to have no father, but now the father has no son, and looking at Jixiang's current state, Subai really it's not clear whether the little guy is dead or alive now, because Subai doesn't believe that the man and the woman care about their grandson. That's wrong. Subai seemed to suddenly remember something and asked, you didn't go out, how did you know about me? It's not difficult to get out, the man in the coffin replied. On one side, Subai was conversing with the person in the coffin, while on the other side, Jixiang and Ruyi were staring at each other. The two cats looked at each other, motionless, as if they were playing with 1, 2, 3 wooden figures. Game. After a long silence, the two cats began to communicate. The response from the coffin here was slower. Subai originally wanted to listen to what the two cats were saying. After all, Subai couldn't figure out Ruyi's attitude towards Jixiang's return. But after listening for a while, Subai gave up. The conversation between the two cats is as follows. Meow. 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 Can it be restored? Subai asked. It's difficult, the man inside the coffin replied. You mean there's a way? But I am a listener, and you are also a listener. It is natural for you to save it, but I have no reason. You're too pedantic, Subai said helplessly. He reached out and touched Jixiang's tail. I owe it? Then who owes you? Subai smiled and said, please don't keep the same tone when you speak, otherwise I can't tell whether you are comforting me or sarcastic. I can't save it, the person inside the coffin said, it was taken out by Suyuhang and has no relationship with me. Subai understood what he meant. He could be saved, but the man in the coffin was unwilling to save because he had nothing to do with Jixiang. To save a big demon and help a big demon that was almost as good as a high-level listener to recover, this one would never be saved again. If a cat does something, the cause and effect will be on him. The one who came to preach last time was just as cowardly as you, Subai responded, but you are actually different from him. He is timid, but you are pedantic. Forget it, I am in vain this time. Coming. You don't seem to have asked how to get out, the man inside the coffin said. I can let you in, but I can't let you out. Too lazy to go out this time, it was Subai's inner words. Here, he could at least isolate the man and woman from looking at him, right? Even though it's pitch dark here, with only cold coffins and dead springs full of dead bones, the funny thing is that this seems to be the only place where I can find a sense of security. In his own eyes, Lao Fang's family used to be an impenetrable fortress, but after the man and the woman came to score twice, the peach blossom garden that Lao Fang had worked so hard to manage seemed to be just that. Decadent, said the person inside the coffin. That's right, Subai stretched out his hand and crossed his hair. Tell me, if I stay here like you, except entering the story world and then staying here, will I be able to slowly become stronger and finally get out one day? Want to take revenge on my parents? No. The man in the coffin quickly rejected it. After waiting for about 3 minutes, the coffin said again. I will become the next me. Subai was amused. In fact, the last time he was here, Subai had called the man in the coffin old brother, because although the two parties did not communicate much, the other party was really good to him, even if he was detained by him. He came here, but he also absorbed the corpse energy for fear that he would starve to death. At the same time, during the brief exchange, Subai actually felt like he was talking to his elders. Don't belittle yourself so much. It would be nice to be the next you. Subai patted the lid of the coffin. His injuries were almost recovered, and he struggled to stand up. Just because I can't save it doesn't mean others can't save it. Who else is here besides you? Subai didn't understand. Besides coffins, there are only dead people here. And the tombstone. This. Subai didn't expect this. It must have been with more than one person. The being in the coffin paused. The tombstones in the underworld are imprinted with the soul marks of those who achieved enlightenment. They can help it, unless they themselves are not willing. Hearing this, Subai first thought of Lichi at this moment, because the first time he came into contact with Lichi was when he sent Jixiang from Nanjing to the Lichi house in Chengdu. Of course, there was another person. That person once slaughtered all the ordinary audience members and above in Shaanxi and built a jingguan in the pit of the terracotta warriors and horses. Moreover, when he was on the phone at the hospital, he used his mobile phone to communicate with Jixiang. That is, Blood Corpse. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 745. Let me give it a try. At this point, it can only be like this. The power of the soul imprint left by a big-name audience cannot be underestimated. Suyuhang waved his hand casually, and more than 20 years later, a huge wave rolled up and swept Subai away. After flying out, Liang Sen had planned to erect his own tombstone next to Li Ji's tombstone, but Li Ji was blown away and replied, "You deserve it too." Although Subai had just been promoted to a high-level audience not long ago, he could probably figure it out in his mind. Although the big-level audience was powerful, it was really not so scary as to leave a mark on the soul. The biggest reason was probably appearing on this place of enlightenment, or on the underworld that keeps flowing back and forth. The soul imprint left behind from that time is soaked in the yellow spring water. Not only will it not dissipate with the passage of time, but it will be nourished and strengthened in it. Jixiang picked up Jixiang. Jixiang didn't seem to have much feelings for Ruyi, and he didn't think it was a big deal to be separated from his cat friend. Ruyi wasn't very excited, but he still followed Sudbai's footsteps silently and stayed with Sudbai. Got up and went to the altar. On the table in the center of the altar, the jade seal of the Dian kingdom is still quietly placed in a jade box. It is a magic weapon. Every big-name audience who preaches will use the jade seal of the Dian kingdom to attract the stones on the wall to make their own. The tombstone then fell into the underworld. Taking a deep breath, Sudbai suddenly thought of a question, that is, the closer he gets to the underworld, even if he does not go down, but only gets slightly closer to it, the underworld will emit a unique bewitching power and attract people in. The original I once tried to commit suicide here, but luckily I didn't die in the end. But the problem is that now, the auspicious spirit in his arms is seriously damaged, and it is no longer the original auspiciousness. If it were the original Jixiang, Sudbai believed that Jixiang would not be affected by Huan Quan, but now, Sudbai was really worried. Jixiang just looked around, without being touched at all by returning home. When humans have amnesia or are in a vegetative state, relatives will find ways to take him to his hometown to find some memories to touch, but this is fully demonstrated by Jixiang. Not coming out. Looking at Ruyi next to him, Sudbai could only sigh. Although they may be the same two black cats, Ruyi and Jixiang have completely different attitudes towards life. Sudbai had seen his cheap parents in the past story world material that was briefly cloned on the radio. Suyuhang's temper at that time was also a standard smiling tiger, so Sudbai didn't think that Suyuhang really only had a crush on Jixiang. I fell in love with it, so I left here with only Jixiang. The more big demon level pets like this, the better. Moreover, because of their relationship with the place of enlightenment, they can still move freely under the sun, which makes them even more precious. Therefore, the situation at that time could only be that Jixiang chose to go out with Suyuhang to see the outside world, while Ruyi chose to continue to stick to this darkness. There is no right or wrong between these two choices, and judging from the experiences of the two cats, no one will regret it. Jixiang has followed Suyuhang, Blood Corpse, Lychee, and Sudbai himself. Let's not mention Suyuhang for now, at least. Judging from the phone calls between Xuezhi and Jixiang and Li Ji's attitude towards Jixiang, they all regarded Jixiang as their friends, even a relationship similar to family members. In Sudbai's case, Sudbai even handed over his son. Let Jixiang take care of it. Ruyi has been accompanying the person in the coffin, and the person in the coffin, at least from the current point of view, is indeed a good person. If both people are withdrawn, they will not need to rely on each other in these long dark years. No matter how many words, just knowing that each other is there is actually enough. I'll hold you for a while. Just be careful, you know. Sudbai didn't know if Jixiang understood it now or not. Afterwards, Sudbai slowly walked into the underworld. At first, when the water had just reached Sudbai's knees, Jixiang had no special reaction. With the improvement of life level and the further sublimation of soul level, Sudbai felt Huan Quan's imminent move and call to him, but it can still be blocked. But when Sudbai completely entered the underworld, Sudbai found that Jixiang's eyes began to become confused. Sudbai thought to himself that it was terrible. As expected, Jixiang still couldn't face Huan Quan's temptation, but there was no turning back when he opened his bow. The principle of catching the tiger's cubs if you don't enter the tiger's den is basically practiced by every listener. Standard. Jixiang must be restored, and this involves not only the news about the little guy, but also Sudbai's compensation for Jixiang's debt. Sudbai began to swim towards the center of the underworld. Jixiang was placed on his shoulder by Sudbai. To be on the safe side, Sudbai still held Jixiang with one hand. But slowly, Sudbai felt that Jixiang's emotions seemed to be getting more and more boiling. Meow meow meow. Jixiang called 3 times in succession, and what showed in his eyes was not greed and infatuation, but a kind of care. Sudbai was very familiar with this look, because every time Jixiang slept with the little guy, he would look at the little guy with this look while stroking the little guy with his tail. Suddenly, Jixiang's legs exerted force, trying to jump out of Sudbai's body and pounce on the little guy he saw in front of him. "Stupid cat, that's fake, that's fake." Sudbai could only hold on to Jixiang's tail. He didn't dare to let Jixiang soar freely in the underworld. God knows whether Jixiang would have had the same good luck as Suyuhang did more than 20 years ago. Way. But Jixiang's struggle began to become more and more intense, and it became more and more angry at Sudbai, who was restraining him. Its claws began to scratch Sudbai's shoulders, and blood marks were already on Sudbai's shoulders. Appeared on the shoulder. "Meow meow meow. Stupid cat, don't move. At this time, faceless people in white clothes appeared on both sides of Huang Quan. They all held lanterns in their hands, as if they were giving guidance or in silence. Sudbai didn't know exactly what the faceless man did and what kind of existence he was. What he only cared about now was that the stupid cat in front of him was almost on the verge of going berserk. If he just used it, doesn't matter if it claws at itself, but now it is struggling to break away from itself, and it even intends to rush out even if it has to tear off its tail. Grass. Sudbai had no choice but to curse, and simply threw forward, hugged Jixiang with both arms, and then sank together. In the underworld, there is still some influence on Sudbai, so here, Sudbai must also spend a lot of effort to control the purity of his spiritual platform, otherwise he is very likely to be bewitched, but Jixiang is already like this. Sudbai Shiro could only make a quick decision. It seemed that because he was too hastily moving forward, his mind was distracted or he was unable to fully defend himself. Sudbai's eyes slowly released a trace of blood red. The last time Sudbai was here, he only felt tranquility, peace, happiness, and indulgence, but this time, what he felt was a surge of anger that was completely ignited. After all, compared with himself who came here half a year ago, Sudbai has experienced more things this time, and at the same time, he has more hatred accumulated deep in his heart. Sudbai began to sink rapidly, and was still getting rid of the entanglement of the surrounding skeletons. These skeletons and corpses instinctively wanted to wrap around and drag Sudbai to be buried with Jixiang. Once people are unlucky, they often have an extreme thought, that is, why should I fall here forever while you can get out? Therefore, most of the bewitching effect of this underworld is caused by the resentment of the victims who fell here. Below, tombstones have begun to appear. Sudbai is looking for them. He probably remembers the location of Lichi's tombstone, so he continues to swim forward, but his eyes are starting to become more and more turbid, and the aura of profiteering emanating from him, but it has begun to become more and more intense, with a strong tendency of a volcano erupting at any time. Jixiang in his arms was struggling like crazy. Even in the water, it seemed to ignore the surrounding environment. Wisps of blood began to spread out from Jixiang's body. Sudbai's restraint and Jixiang's struggle at all costs, let Jixiang's body begin to break down. But when the blood spread out, a vibration suddenly sounded in the distance. Boom! A tombstone suddenly rose from the depths of the underworld and rushed straight towards here. The other party seemed to be more anxious than himself. Click! The surrounding yellow spring water seemed to be pushed out, forming a circular vacuum area under the water surface, and the magnificent and domineering tombstone was steadily suspended in front of it. The tombstone reads, "The grave where my wife and I are buried together." A sad feeling was exaggerated from the tombstone. Sudbai knew whose tombstone belonged to him, but Sudbai did not expect that when the bloody corpse attained enlightenment that year, he did not bury his most popular resentment. This matter is regarded as a tombstone for himself and his wife to be buried together. Perhaps, from the moment of his sermon, the bloody corpse had no intention of burying the so-called hatred deeply. All his subsequent actions were for revenge broadcast. Even in the end after that, he was suppressed, and everything he owned was broken down by the radio and used as an opportunity for other listeners to obtain. Auspicious. In front of the tombstone, a man's figure appeared. Jixiang became quiet. It looked at the tombstone in front of it, a little dumbfounded. A strange feeling of familiarity came to it, but it made it clueless. The figure on the tombstone looked at Subai. I'm already dead, right? Subai nodded. You are already dead. If you can, please save it. Okay. The tombstone began to crack, then begin to fall apart. Everything started just after the words "oh" and "okay" /. This. It fits the character of Blood Corpse very well. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 746. Chapter 746. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm a little stuck, and I'm inexplicably sleepy. I've been revising and revising this chapter but haven't finished it yet. I owe you all a chapter. Plus, I have something to do during the day today, so the update will be late. In short, I owe you this update. Make it up before the end of the month. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 747. Until now, Subai didn't know the name of the bloody corpse, and he didn't have the habit of reporting his family name. However, there is no difference between some people with names and no names, and some people can be remembered directly even without names. The relationship between Subai and the blood corpse is very complicated, but it is also very simple. The first contact between the two parties was just a misunderstanding, and the reason why the blood corpse was discovered by the broadcast and forced into the world of ghosts to suppress it is actually the above is also a ridiculous coincidence. Who told the bloody corpse to lie in the morgue and talk in his sleep, and then he was overheard by the ghost of a nurse who died suddenly in the morgue. Then the nurse who died suddenly had a dream with his former colleague, and finally became the nurse who beat the fat man. When the patient was asked on the phone about his whereabouts, he blurted out the word Yezi. Of course, in the eyes of Subai and others at that time, this matter was a coincidence that made people speechless. But now it seems that with the improvement of everyone's strength and vision, the angle and height of looking at things, it's completely different. Was the bloody corpse incident really just a coincidence? When the broadcaster was about to inquire about the identity of the blood corpse, one by one, countless factors, and various probabilities began to work in this direction. In the end, driven by an unknown number of factors, Yezi, this name was spoken by the fat man who was the audience. Later in the story world, Subai obtained the inheritance of the blood corpse, but the blood corpse was not given to Subai on purpose. He intended to seize Subai's body and give himself a glorious ending, but in the end it was still Subai. If you win, you will get the blood corpse bloodline inheritance. After that, he entered the story world of Mr. Zombie for the second time. Although it was a blood corpse, it really had nothing to do with the blood corpse. It was just a clone. Moreover, Subai could clearly feel that the broadcast it is possible to clone an identical person, but there is really no way to clone the soul of a real person. This time, he was facing the tombstone of a bloody corpse. This is also the last trace of existence left by the blood corpse in this world. Among the audience, he can be regarded as a figure belonging to the previous era. In the ordinary world, with his death, his position in this real world has also been broadcasting erases naturally. The tombstone is a carrier of the dead, carrying a kind of sustenance and longing. Now, as the words "oh" and "good" are said, the tombstone is also broken, and there are lines between virtuality and reality. Bloodlines began to fly. For a time, there was a long line of blood in the underworld. On both sides of the yellow spring, the faceless people holding lanterns made a trembling sound from their throats, as if they were saying goodbye or crying. Anyone who can leave a tombstone here is definitely a proud person. They may be timid, selfish, ruthless, free and easy, or headstrong. But nothing can erase their excellence. The blood threads began to slowly merge into Jixiang's body. Jixiang squinted his eyes and seemed to feel quite comfortable. His body was almost broken, and right now, the blood threads were helping him reweave his body. The lid of the coffin slowly rose, and there seemed to be a gaze from inside, looking outside, seeming to be observing what was happening in the underworld. A sigh came from the coffin. The scene of that man's sermon seemed to be still vivid in his mind, because he remembered that when that man came to preach, his whole body exuded a kind of violence that could hardly be concealed, and the sermon was connected with the tombstone. At the same time, it is actually a kind of abandonment and exile, and also a kind of abandonment of one's own shortcomings. Most of the enlightened people integrate their most cowardly weaknesses into tombstones and put them into the underworld. In this way, they can be more perfect. But that man did not bury his hatred and anger. He just calmly summoned the stone with the jade seal of the Dian kingdom. He slowly carved out the tombstone where he and his deceased wife were buried together with his fingers, and then slowly threw it into the underworld. Middle. He doesn't want to let go of his hatred, and he doesn't feel that he needs to let go of it. He wants revenge, and he seizes the day. In fact, he doesn't seem to intend to move forward for much longer. He doesn't think about pursuing the so-called ultimate, but thinks about carrying the burden. Follow your own hatred and end your life meaningfully as soon as possible. There is nothing greater than grief. There are so many infatuated people in ancient and modern times, but how many are really so infatuated that they will remain together until death and turn into butterflies? Ruyi squatted on the altar, with blood threads flying in the yellow spring water. This was the last swan song of a great man. There was no foreshadowing, no exaggeration, and no impassioned words or exchanges of heartfelt feelings. There is only one right. For a moment, Ruyi's eyes were a little confused. Since it can remember, it has existed in the place of enlightenment, and this is its home. Of course, it has a partner by its side. However, that partner seems to be different from me. I am willing to stay here and protect it, but that partner is slowly starting to get tired of this place. More than 20 years ago, the man promised to take them out to experience the outside world, but Ruyi chose to refuse, and his partner followed the man out of here. There was no complaint or resentment, just as when Ruyi saw his partner come back, he was not too excited and just said hello in a normal way, but the other party obviously did not remember him. The outside world is very dangerous, because when Ruyi saw Jixiang become like this, his soul was broken, his body collapsed, and even his memory was gone, but the outside world seemed equally wonderful. Because Ruyi saw that there was actually a tombstone that was willing to break itself apart just to help it heal. In Ruyi's opinion, the listeners who entered here to preach were all strange and powerful beings. Now, it speaks volumes that some of them are willing to do this to their partners. In a daze, Ruyi turned around and looked into the darkness. The coffin trembled slightly at this time, as if in response to Ruyi's gaze. Ruyi buried her head. Suddenly, Ruyi felt that she actually had nothing to envy. Meow. Jixiang, whose whole body was wrapped in blood, had a look of confusion in his eyes at this moment. This feeling was very familiar, but he no longer remembered it. The bloodline slowly disappeared, and finally disappeared completely. The fragments of the tombstone floated up and merged into the cliff. The blood corpse had completely erased all traces of its existence. Subai was a little sad, but he also understood that sometimes, in some places, he was actually another blood corpse. It was just that the object of hatred of the blood corpse was the radio, while the object of Sudbai's hatred was the man and woman. But, in other words, Sudbai firmly believed in the supremacy of broadcasting. In other words, without the indulgence and acquiescence of broadcasting, how could a man and a woman score twice in their own family? But now, even when facing that man and woman, Sudbai couldn't bear to hate him, and his hatred was a bit out of reach. Therefore, Sudbai naturally didn't think too much about it, and he didn't spread it to the radio. The place of enlightenment is the water of the underworld. In fact, Sudbai's path is very clear. If he just wants to purely pursue the improvement of strength, then what he wants to pursue next is to come here as soon as possible and let go of himself here. Tombstone. However, the road is too clear, but it is too boring to walk on it. If you want to live at ease and live casually, it has almost become a luxury wish. Instead, it is better to find a suitable and understandable excuse to let yourself die. You can get rid of this boring life route and go to rest in advance. However, this reason must be able to convince yourself, make you feel that you are not just giving up, and make you feel at ease. Jixiang stood there in confusion, and the vacuum area created by the blood corpse was slumping as its tombstone completely dissipated. Soon, the yellow spring water would completely cover this place. However, the blood corpse only helped Jixiang reweave his body. Although it was not fully restored, it slowly cultivated and it only took a short time to fully recover. However, Jixiang's soul was still the same, which is equivalent to being an ordinary cat now, with the body of a great demon. The blood corpse has tried its best, because he has no reason or necessity to stay, but Jixiang has not recovered yet. Now, it has not even recovered its memory. But fortunately, there is another one here. And from the perspective of intuition and deeds, this person is almost indistinguishable from the two generations. However, she hasn't shown up yet. Yes. She hasn't shown up yet. The underworld is slowly approaching. Sudbai holds Jixiang in his arms to prevent the underworld from approaching again and causing Jixiang to fall into hallucination again, because Jixiang's soul has not been restored. Why hasn't she come yet? The blood corpse sensed Jixiang's aura and came over on his own initiative. When he helped Jixiang recover his body, Sudbai couldn't believe that her tombstone couldn't sense it with such great momentum and battle. But she still hasn't appeared. When the bloody corpse finished its performance and was young and beautiful, shouldn't she be the one to take the stage for the next scene? Sudbai remembered his first contact with her, when she asked him to send Jixiang back to Chengdu. During the period after she left by train, Sudbai also saw Jixiang's lost and lonely figure. This state has always been the little guy changed after he was taken out of the story world. Logically speaking, her relationship with Jixiang should be very good. The yellow spring returned to tranquility, and the yellow spring water once again submerged Sudbai and the auspiciousness in Sudbai's arms, but the tombstone still did not appear. Sudbai did not believe that it was because she was powerless. In fact, the shadow of the famous tree no longer appeared. In addition, her action of directly smashing Liang Sen's tombstone last time proved her absolute strength, and she must not be among the blood corpses. So, are you unwilling? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 748. The bewitching power from the yellow spring water is emitted again, and the surrounding area seems to be shrouded in fog layer by layer, making it difficult to see clearly. But this time, Sudbai found that although Jixiang's body in his arms began to tremble again, it was obviously exercising self-restraint, at least not as extreme as the previous time when it struggled desperately and even broke its tail. Sudbai's eyes began to wander. In fact, he knew in his heart that since Li Ji didn't want to come out, it didn't make any difference whether he found the tombstone or not. This is just like asking a friend to borrow money on WeChat when you are short of money. If the message is sent and the person does not reply for a long time, then there is actually no need to continue to call others or send video reminders. Because, sometimes, silence indicates an attitude. However, for Subai, it was indeed a great regret that Jixiang's soul could not recover this time. The man in the coffin pointed out a way for him, but now there are twists and turns on this road, and no one can blame him. Come on, even if it's lychee, it's actually blameless. At the next moment, Subai decided to leave Huangquan first. He was worried that Ji Xiang wouldn't be able to hold on for long even if he forced himself to hold on. At that moment, Subai started to walk towards the shore. When Subai came out, the faceless lamp holders on both sides of the strait had disappeared, as if they had never existed at all. This place of enlightenment has too many secrets. For Subai now, unless the person in the coffin is willing to tell him something, with Subai's current strength, it is true that he cannot see through the veil of darkness shrouding the place of enlightenment. Back on the shore, Subai sat down. Ji Xiang shook the water droplets from his hair beside Subai, and Ruyi was still kneeling on the altar and looking down quietly. He was not very excited when his friend came back, nor was he very excited when his friend regretted not being able to recover. These two cats really seemed like the most familiar strangers. However, according to Ji Xiang's character, even if the two black cats have been living in this place of enlightenment, they probably will not develop into a relationship where you lick my fur today and I will scratch your lice tomorrow. Suddenly, I felt a little decadent and a little disappointed. Subai looked at Jixiang on the side and reached out to touch its head. Jixiang still subconsciously rolled his eyes to show disgust, but he no longer resisted. The main reason why Lychee didn't come out was that she didn't want to have anything to do with that man and woman anymore. Perhaps because of the different heights, she saw things from different angles. In fact, Subai knew one thing in his heart. That's why Jixiang came back like this, but the little guy disappeared. Everything. Maybe it's just to allow myself to bring good fortune back to the place of enlightenment. Lychee is very tall, but before Chen Sheng's rebellion, she was just a braggart who helped the landlord's farm. Similarly, no matter how tall Lychee is now, she was just like herself before, being toyed with by the man and the woman. Chess pieces between them. Everyone, it's nothing more than a smile at 100 steps. To be honest, Subai was really disappointed that Lychee didn't come to the rescue this time. Maybe she had a lot of worries, or maybe she had a bigger plan, but a bloody corpse can do this. You were free and easy, but you, Lychee, suddenly disappeared uncharacteristically, which really made Subai feel uncomfortable. This is not because Subai deliberately thinks that others owe him or Jixiang, but because if they really exchange places, Subai is sure that he will help Jixiang recover without hesitation. Vaguely, when Subai first became an audience, the battle between Li Ji and the man and the woman had already begun. On his side, it was just a small pattern of the battle between the two sides, or it could only be called a link, but some things, some ideas, some things are meaningless if you think about them too much or too complicatedly. Now, in Subai's eyes, Lizzie may have almost become the second man and woman. Her plans and attempts can be clearly seen from some of the things she asked Gong Zihai to do. You hate someone, but gradually you become the person you hate. What's the point of living like this, living like this? Ruyi walked up to Jixiang, got closer, and looked at Jixiang up close. Looking at the pair of black cats, Subai seemed to see himself and Lychee, two cats. One was willing to stay in the darkness of the place of enlightenment, while Jixiang wanted to go out and see the colorful world outside. This mentality corresponds to the difference between myself and Lychee. Subai casually picked up a stone next to him and threw it into the underworld. Subai sighed, turned around, and walked directly back to the altar. Then he got down from the altar and walked towards the coffin. Jixiang was not well yet, and Subai had no intention of going out. Of course, When Subai held Jixiang in his arms and jumped off the black spiral nest without hesitation and was teleported here, he actually didn't think too much about whether he could get out of this place. Question. Lao Fang spent a lot of energy to build a peach blossom garden for himself, but for Subai, the place where he could avoid the gaze and influence of a man and a woman was his own peach blossom garden. This kind of thinking is a bit disappointing, a bit discouraged, and even a bit hopeless, but about facing the difficulties, Subai doesn't want to drink the chicken soup. No one can understand this feeling of his, while facing the high pressure of the broadcast. While also facing the man and woman who are being targeted more and more frequently and obviously as their strength increases. Tired, for sure. Subai sat down against the coffin. Jixiang and Ruyi also came over, but neither of the two black cats came close. They sat on the steps below in tacit agreement, one on the left and the other on the right. If the lighting engineer turns on the lights at this time, adjusts the angle, and takes a photo, then this photo will definitely become a classic among decadent and non-mainstream style photos. A purple-haired young man was resting tiredly on the coffin, with his hands on his knees. Beside the steps at his feet, two black cats were lying motionless. The picture is really beautiful. This sitting lasted for several hours. During this period, the coffin was very quiet, Subai was also very quiet, and the two black cats were also very quiet. Until, a wisp of black energy suddenly filled the coffin. This was corpse energy, extremely pure corpse energy. Subai smiled. He remembered that when he was trapped here more than half a year ago, the person in the coffin also released this ray of corpse energy for him to absorb every day. The amount was not large, but it was enough to prevent him from dying due to exhaustion of strength. Starve. Now, Subai was already a high-level audience. He was hungry and could not die from hunger, but Subai still took the initiative to absorb this ray of corpse energy. Reaching out and patting the coffin gently, Subai said, "Why does this feel like an elder giving candy to a younger one? You are indeed my junior, no matter what the relationship between me and Suyuhang is," the man in the coffin said. "We two losers are really hugging each other here to keep warm," Subai sighed. "I am a loser, you are not," the man in the coffin said. He never spoke with an obvious tone and his tone was very calm. Therefore, in one sentence, it is difficult for you to tell whether he wants to comfort you or mock you. It's not time for you to make your own choice yet. I can choose to commit suicide. Subai reached out and knocked on his forehead. I think if I commit suicide, their plan will be in vain, right? Broadcasting won't select people who don't want to live. After the coffin was silent for a while, he continued, "Besides, you already have a child." Inadvertently, the person in the coffin revealed the tip of the iceberg of the secret between the man and the woman, but it was enough to shock Subai's heart. "I have a child?" This sentence directly stimulated Subai. Could it be that the reason why his cheap parents took away the little guy was to make the little guy repeat his own path? When he thought of the little guy floating in the cold petri dish glass container, and then the confused little guy was filled with memories in front of the scroll, the veins on Subai's arm subconsciously appeared. "But my son is not my biological son." Subai didn't want to believe this was true. The difference between biological and biological is just the DNA sequence. You have the blood of Suyuhang and others, but has your mother really been pregnant with you for a day? The person in the coffin seemed to simply say, "So, don't be decadent at any time, especially before you bite the person you want to kill, don't be decadent." Subai took a deep breath, spit it out heavily, and then said, "Thank you, your chicken soup is really filling. I am just standing from the perspective of a loser. I hope that you can succeed, and if you can see that your son, who has been used as a test subject and carrier, takes his own life in the future, this story I like the ending." The man in the coffin laughed as he spoke. With his fingertips tapping gently on the coffin, Subai suddenly said, "So, is this also consistent with the storytelling that broadcasting is pursuing?" You'll know when the time comes. The man in the coffin changed the topic. That girl didn't come out, did she? Don't blame her. Everyone's choices are different, and the decisions they make are naturally different. After all, not everyone is like you. No matter how much suffering they have, they still live so purely. What's down there? Subai asked. What's down there? It's a normal rhythm. I drank chicken soup and gave me an injection of chicken blood. Isn't it time to give me some actual benefits? You know that lychee won't save Jixiang, right? After going around in a big circle, there are only two possibilities. One is to let the blood corpse help you with half of the work to save you some energy. The other is that you come to help after Li Ji doesn't help. It's so convenient to give me conditions. Ji Xiang and Ruyi, who were crawling under the steps, looked at each other, and then looked at the coffin and Subai on the steps. Both cats noticed it. The originally friendly atmosphere above suddenly disappeared. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 749. Actually, I think there is no need to be so direct between us. Why Chinese people like to discuss business at the wine table is because the atmosphere created by the wine and the people accompanying them at the wine table allows everyone to have room to advance and retreat when discussing business, and it will not be so embarrassing. Subai nodded, but you also know that all beautiful feelings are false, so it is better to let the dream come true in time, and at least retain some good memories from the past. I need you to do something for me, the being in the coffin admitted directly. Help me restore my good fortune first, Subai said. Don't you want to hear what I want you to do first? If you don't help me restore my good fortune first, I won't even bother to listen. Subai still leaned on the wall of the coffin, his tone relaxed and calm. This is my bottom line. Everything is based on the fact that you help Jixiang recover first, otherwise, there is no need to discuss anything. This is Subai's attitude, and there is no room for negotiation. As for whether the being in the coffin would trust him, Subai didn't know or was unsure. After all, he was tricked by Su Yuhang 20 years ago and now he was Su Yuhang's son. Would he choose to believe it? Still an unknown. Jump once in a big pit and continue to jump in an identical and similar small pit? I can't say for sure. What if someone really doesn't believe in evil? He. The person in the coffin laughed, but I still couldn't understand what he meant, because he really didn't have any emotion in his words, and it was difficult for people to guess directly. Moreover, he was in the coffin, like a woman holding a pipa. With his face half covered, it's hard for you to really get a glimpse of his true face. Of course, after so many years of old guy, no matter how stupid he is, he can become a man by now. What's more, although he was tricked by Su Yuhang back then, someone who is qualified to be tricked by Su Yuhang is enough to show his excellence from the side. A long time. The other party responded. Good. Immediately, a ray of black light floated out from the coffin and slowly fell on Jixiang's body. This was a kind of nourishment, using his soul power to help Jixiang recover. This price is extremely high. Because of injuries and other things, the radio will help the listener fully recover the next time he enters and exits the story world. However, the radio will not care about soul matters and will choose to treat them differently. Just like if you become obsessed, the radio will not help you wake up. It will only help you heal the trauma it identifies. Of course, if your soul is severely damaged, it will help you recover, but this is your initiative to use the source of your soul. To give to others is not a result of creation, but a non-traumatic weakness of your own soul caused by your own behavior, and the radio will not care about you. In short, if you did it yourself, what you did was your body, and the radio helped you recover. If you did it to your soul, then the radio would watch you die and be indifferent. As for whether the radio can know whether you really did it, then you can give it a try. Over the years, I have been counting people who can avoid being tracked and identified by broadcasts. Now it seems that there are only those two people. Even an existence like Lychee must take the train and leave obediently. The soul power of a boss-level listener is indeed powerful. It seems that only a strong man of this level can have the luxury of using his soul origin to help a big demon with a strength comparable to that of a high-level listener to restore the soul. Moreover, it is very likely that he specializes in souls. Only the audience of big bosses in the field will do. People like Liang Sen can't do it to this extent. This is Sudbai's own opinion, and it is also an intuition belonging to advanced listeners. Sudbai was still leaning on the wall of the coffin, watching the auspicious atmosphere being restored bit by bit, because this was a naturally accompanying effect of the recovery of memory and self. When Jixiang begins to remember that he is Jixiang, the previous temperament will slowly return to him, just like Chow Yun-fat's acting performance before and after amnesia in the movie God of Gamblers. After all, a person's temperament and that person's memory, that is, experience, are almost likely to be the same. When you forget who you are, the temperament that originally belonged to you will disappear or be completely different. You didn't even tell me what you wanted me to do for you, and you just took action. Are you really not afraid that I'll default on your debt? Sudbai asked with some confusion. The other party actually believed in him so much. Sudbai would not be foolishly moved by being trusted by a big-name audience for no reason. On the contrary, Sudbai was more confused because he really didn't think that the person in the coffin had spent so much money. He paid a price to help himself heal Jixiang, so he felt confident that he would keep his promise. Even a low-level listener wouldn't be so naive, right? The soul power, as rich as liquid, kept flowing out from the coffin and integrated into Jixiang's body. Jixiang began to slowly stretch his body, and his eyes that were originally a little cute began to become clearer and clearer, as if like amber in the depths of the sea, it is deep and cold, with an attitude that repels people thousands of miles away. Sudbai took out a cigarette and lit it. The cigarette curled up, but Sudbai was a little confused at this moment. Jixiang was taken away with the little guy on that rainy night. When Jixiang's soul recovered, it meant that his memory was also gone. Will recover, and the truth about that rainy night will completely surface. Although Jixiang has never spoken, Sudbai knows that if Jixiang wants to express himself, it is still very simple. After all, it is a big demon. It is just too lazy to speak human language and too lazy to eat human food. But Sudbai didn't think the cat would continue to remain silent about the little guy. Looking at Jixiang's confused look while holding fresh milk in his mouth before at home, this cat's love and care for the little guy is no worse than his own father. He took a puff of the cigarette, feeling the feeling of his lungs being filled, and then slowly exhaled it. Looking at the alluring soul power flowing out of the coffin, Sudbai said, "If there's more, give me one too. Sooner or later, it's all yours." The man in the coffin suddenly responded. Sudbai was stunned for a moment, shook the ashes, but didn't say anything. Maybe the person in the coffin knew something, but he didn't know it, so he could be so sure and confident. Don't even ask yourself whether you will regret it or cheat. Ruyi crouched in front of Jixiang. It could sense that its former partner was slowly coming back. Regarding this, Ruyi still seemed very calm, even a little indifferent. The two cats did not form a CP in these and long dark years. Even before, everyone played their own roles. They are actually equivalent to the guardians of the place of enlightenment, playing the same role as Gao Zaman. The stone lions in the front are similar, except that they are more terrifying and fierce. Of course, they are only responsible for guarding the place of enlightenment so that it will not be offended by people or listeners who accidentally enter. As for the big guys who come here to preach, they are not at a level they can handle. I still remember that man with the evil smile squatted in front of me and my friends, and said a lot of wonderful things about the outside world, but I chose to retreat because it didn't think the outside world was so good, and it felt like it was here. It would be nice to continue living. And his partner finally followed the man and left here. It is not lost, because it has no real companionship. Now it is back, and there is a human beside it. It should have a good relationship with many humans over the years. At least, the human sitting on the steps smoking still has a good relationship with it. Very cherished. It's coming back. After coming back, that human shouldn't be able to touch its head casually. Ruyi thought so in her heart. The world of cats is indeed much purer and simpler than that of humans. Of course, at their level of life, there is no need to look for food in garbage dumps or act cute to please their owners. They can naturally do whatever they want, simply and purely. Sudbai's cigarette was almost reaching its end without realizing it. At this time, the soul power in the coffin stopped being transported. When the last ray of soul power merged into Ji Xiang's body, Ji Xiang closed his eyes and his body began to tremble. This is a sign that the soul is reawakened after being repaired. Sudbai threw away the cigarette butt, walked down the steps, and squatted down in front of Ji Xiang. Ji Xiang slowly opened his eyes, but Sudbai suddenly turned back to look at the coffin and shouted. "How is this going?" Because after Ji Xiang opened his eyes, Sudbai saw a pair of cat eyes glowing with blood. Sudbai's first reaction was that there was something wrong with the person in the coffin, because the soul belongs to the existence of the soul level, and the most important thing in this aspect is they are sensitive, and a slight mistake could be a disaster. Ji Xiang's clear and cold eyes disappeared, and at this moment, it suddenly became violent. Meow. Sudbai did not continue to question the person in the coffin, but turned his head and looked at Ji Xiang, because in Ji Xiang's meow, what Sudbai heard was not complete hysteria and rage, but a deep feeling. Sorrow. Meow. Ji Xiang's figure transformed into a ray of black light and rushed out, and Sudbai immediately followed. Meow. Meow. Ji Xiang is screaming, and the cry is very shrill, like a cuckoo crying for blood. Finally, Ji Xiang climbed over the altar and came to the yellow spring. It started to scream at the yellow spring. 2 lines of blood and tears emerged from the auspicious cat's eyes. The cry was questioning, sad, and angry. A voice, hoarse. Endless sorrow, endless anger, and endless disbelief. This is a feeling of being betrayed by the person closest to you. At this time, Ji Xiang almost made his voice hoarse. Cat tears mixed with blood kept dripping down. The Huangquan water was surging, but at this moment, it was suppressed by the sorrow of the meowing cats. On the rock walls and on both sides. Keep echoing. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 750. Golf courses, even now, are considered a relatively luxurious sport for ordinary people. The development of science and technology has actually brought the quality of life of the poor and the rich closer, but there are always some accidents or calls. In special places, it is temporarily difficult to use technological products to reduce costs, especially in a period when real estate has almost become a pillar industry in China. After Liang Sen finished his swing, he threw the club in his hand to the waitress on the side, then took the beer from the other party and took a big sip. To be honest, Liang Sen doesn't like this kind of sport very much. One of the important reasons why he got into the game production industry in the past was that he didn't want to deal with people outside. He just wanted to close the door and immerse himself in the game he built. In the virtual world to avoid the gaze of the real world. But now, he is trying to change his living habits and his attitude towards life. In the future, for him, there is not much room for choice. No matter how much struggle he makes, no matter how many attempts he makes, it really doesn't mean much to Liang Senator. He himself doesn't even have much hope anymore. waiting for the day when the train ticket will be delivered to you. Not far away, Xie, who was wearing casual clothes, came step by step. Liang Sen knew that his secretary had always imitated him and was strict about life. Oh no, it could be said that he was strict to the point of being harsh. He could often see his own shadow in Xie. "Come, let's play another game with you," Liang Sen said. Xie nodded, took the club, and the two of them turned back. During the kickoff, Xie said casually while making preparations. "That night, I remember you went out to chase someone." "Oh, what night?" Liang Sen asked. "It was that night." Xie smiled and hit the ball. Liang Sen took the club and said with a smile, "Why are you talking about this suddenly?" "Because of curiosity, you know, curiosity may kill the cat." Xie held the club in his hand and faced Liang Sen. "Boss, who was the person who showed up that night?" "I remember you said, he is back." "Don't you already know?" Liang Sen asked. "But you never confirmed it with me." "In fact, boss, I should have thought of it earlier. That night you said that the man escaped the broadcaster's gaze but came back, and then you chased him out." "Then what?" "Then, that time, boss, why did you have the courage to chase him out?" Xie signaled the waiters around him to step back, and several waiters also turned and left. Haha, Liang Sen smiled. "Boss, there are no secrets between you and me, right?" Xie took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. "We won't go around in circles anymore. When the last broadcast came, the boss, I can see everything you look like, but that night, when you sensed the aura of the broadcast and pursued that person, you also chased him out to check the situation. Of course, enlightenment can bring great changes to people, but I don't think it can subvert a person's character." "Then tell me, who was the person I chased that night?" Liang Sen asked. "There are really not many people who can make you disregard everything and even make you temporarily forget the fear of broadcasting and make impulsive choices. I don't dare to put myself in it. So, who is the only one left?" "That woman, she came back that night, right?" "Xie, your current strength level is not enough. Even if you know some things, it doesn't mean anything." Liang Sen sighed and did not directly answer Xie's words. "Are you asking this for the sake of that little detective? Just because he didn't kill your mother, so you feel that you owe him a favor, but last time we helped him find a cat, it was already." Ji Zhen threw the cigarette butt heavily on the ground, then stepped on it with the sole of his shoe. "Boss, did you want to do that experiment, or did she ask you to help do it?" "Is there any difference?" Liang Sen asked. "Yes, there is a big difference. If you are the boss and you want to do it, I will help you do it. My adoptive mother will be in danger because of this. I admit it, I will be in pain and I will be sad, but I admit it. But if that woman just asked you to do it, you did it, and then my adoptive mother really had an accident because of it. Sorry. Boss. I only recognize you as my boss." "That woman, who is she?" snapped. Liang Sen slapped Ji Zhen on the face, and a bloody slap mark appeared on Ji Zhen's face. "You are not allowed to say that about her," Liang Sen said very calmly. Ji Zhen grinned and smiled, and a wisp of bright red blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He didn't know whether he was laughing at himself or at the boss standing in front of him. Chengdu, Sichuan. Hongpalu Street, Wuhao District. Wuhao International Garden Community. The climate in Chengdu is always so pleasant. As a plain in the center of the basin, it is like a carefully cared for woman. It does not have the charming and rouge atmosphere of the south of the Yangtze River, nor the edges and sharpness of the northwest, nor the roughness and heroism of the northeast. Some, in addition to being calm, are still calm, like a Perta woman with a free and easy personality, with a longing for the future and the joy of the pot of roses in front of her. The wind blew gently from the window, bringing a little coolness and dissipating a lot of the sultry heat of summer. A graceful woman is sitting on a white sofa, holding a copy of Rabindranath Tagore's Birds in her hand, with a cup of tea beside her making smoke, which looks particularly beautiful in this afternoon. The wind blew through the woman's hair, and she gently combed it with her hands. This was an exquisite woman, so subtle that every move she made seemed to interpret these two words. Ding! The elevator sounded. This was an ordinary elevator apartment with front and rear doors facing each other, and this house was very close to the elevator. The sound of footsteps came, gradually approaching. The other party seemed to hesitate at the door for a long time, hesitant. The woman gently put down the book in her hand. She knew who was coming back. To be honest, she was really panicking when she couldn't see it for a while. Most women have had a dream, that is, to have a pet of their own, and her pet is definitely better than any other pet in the world. Women are sure of this. Finally, the person outside the house opened the door. Not only was the door unlocked, it wasn't even closed. A black cat naturally jumped out of the man's bag outside and walked into the house. The man, who was also very sensible, turned around and left without striking up a conversation or speaking. The woman was still sitting on the sofa. When the black cat came over, she gently stretched out her arms to pick up the black cat. Black cats are not clingy, but this kind of little tsundere is so charming and cute, enough to completely fill your girl's heart. Moreover, the black hair all over its body is not the so-called mink in terms of softness and feel. In comparison, hugging it is really like hugging the whole world. Meow. The black cat barked softly, telling his master that I was back, but the way he said hello did not seem to be to his master, but to a friend of his. The woman gently pressed her chin against the black cat. She enjoyed the intimacy with the black cat because she knew that it could understand her, and she could also understand it. Although there was one person and one cat, she could achieve a kind of harmony that is simply encountered but not sought outside. Taking out her phone, the woman tapped her fingers lightly on the screen. The black cat yawned. He had no interest in looking at the phone. He just felt a little bored. "How about that guy?" the woman asked, knowing that the black cat could understand her. The black cat remained silent, just wagging its tail slightly, because the black cat didn't know how to describe its feelings, and it was unwilling to speak. Many times, it even chose to face the situation with silence. The world, because 20 years ago, silence was actually all it lived. However, the black cat also started to think. It thought of the panic that the guy showed when he looked into his eyes for the first time, and also of his panic and confusion when he took him to find the haunted house. Actually, quite interesting. But it seems that after staying with a woman for a long time, the black cat has gradually become accustomed to this kind of indifferent life. It is a creature that has come out of loneliness, so it doesn't think there is anything wrong with living with a woman. Lonely and boring, the sunset every night, the sunrise every day, and the stars in the sky at night are already much more exciting than my previous life. The woman put the phone aside and whispered into the black cat's ear. "I was just texting him." The black cat looked indifferent. It had always been like this, cold, extremely cold, no matter who it faced. "I told him to be careful of people like him," the woman said almost with a smile, and then she picked up the cup of tea next to her, but when she picked it up, the tea in the cup instantly turned into bright red wine. The woman took a sip, and her expression could not tell whether it was anger or something else. It just showed one more emotion than the absolute furuimuha. "After all, he and I are both poor people. The first one is me, and the next one is him." As the woman spoke, she raised her head and looked upward. "Jixiang, you grew up in a place of enlightenment, and you may not understand some things. In this world, big fish eat small fish, and if the small fish wants to escape the fate of being eaten, it must eat the small fish behind it and turn itself into a big fish. I think I really had no other choice. But at least I gave him a reminder, right? The woman hugged the black cat and muttered to herself, her eyes slowly becoming moist. Because I also want to become a big fish. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 751. Jixiang is still screaming and hysterical. At this time, Jixiang's image has nothing to do with the aloofness that originally belonged to him. However, it is precisely because of this extremely sharp contrast that we can see the torment and pain in Jixiang's heart at this time. Subai did not go to comfort Jixiang, because comfort was of no use at this time. When he decided to help Jixiang recover his soul, he was actually destined to give this pain to Jixiang again. Forgetting is actually a very good means of healing, but at this time, neither Subai nor Jixiang would be so cowardly. Hatred will still be remembered. Damn cat, be quiet. I'm so annoyed. Subai cursed. Jixiang was stunned for a moment, then turned his head and stared at Subai with his red eyes. I wasn't as embarrassed as you when I knew my life experience. Now you are like an ignorant girl who was manipulated by a scumbag who played with her emotions and body and cried bitterly to the river. Isn't it embarrassing? Jixiang's body began to twitch. This was anger, a lot of anger, and this anger had a tendency to be transferred to Subai because of Subai's provocation. Subai ignored Jixiang, who might be on the verge of going berserk at any time. Well, now everyone really is the eldest brother and does not laugh at the second brother. From now on, no one should pretend to be cold in front of anyone, and no one should show off in front of anyone. You've been pretending to be aloof for so long, and in the end, you were stabbed gently in the back by the beautiful mistress you had been with before? After brushing the dust off his shoulders, Subai lowered his head in a somewhat pretentious manner and reached out to sweep the top of his boots. When doing these actions, he actually knew that he was being too deliberate and artificial. After all, he was not facing a senior person. These are not low-level listeners or ordinary people, but two black cats and the person in the coffin. But now that you've done it, you can't just do it halfway, otherwise it will look more embarrassing. Jixiang's hysteria, coupled with Subai's inability to advance or retreat at this time, can be seen that the man and the cat were distracted at this time. When Subai walked back to the coffin, the lid of the coffin was still floating, shrouded in a black mist, making it look very mysterious. You already knew that, right? Subai asked as he walked up the steps. Ruyi is still crawling in its original position, and even Jixiang's hysterical screams have not affected it much. For it, Jixiang was not its playmate before, nor is it now, nor will it be in the future. Since the two cats have chosen different paths, it is naturally difficult for them to become fellow travelers. The person in the coffin quickly responded to Subai's question. Does it make any difference if I already knew it? Subai shrugged, there really is no difference. Towards the end, the more I discovered the fact, that I am actually the stupidest one. I am just an egg with a crack, and every fly wants to bite me. This is indeed Subai's deepest feeling now. In fact, Subai is really not afraid of being bitten by too many lice. First it was the man and the woman, and now there is a lychee, it doesn't matter. Subai felt that he should be angry, but after anger was used countless times in a short period of time, it became plain water, tasteless. In fact, he was so angry that he was numb. That man and woman gave birth to themselves as experimental subjects, then ruined their childhood and distorted their entire lives, and Lychee should be the real culprit who took away Jixiang and the little guy. It's really annoying and funny. I, Subai, am so virtuous and capable that all of you bosses take me seriously and come to torment me. You are indeed much stronger than I thought, the being in the coffin said. Don't talk such useless nonsense. Subai stopped yelling now, and it could indeed be seen that at this time, he was really not as indifferent as those previous actions seemed. Yes, how could it not matter? The real culprit who kidnapped his son has been found, but this real culprit, like his cheap parents, also belongs to the group of people you can't find at all. It's like a young man who has been burdened with a family's blood feud grows up and suddenly someone tells him that the enemy who destroyed your family lives outside the galaxy. You have to wait until human aviation technology has developed to that level before you can have a chance. Go for revenge, oh no, only then will you have the opportunity to see your enemy with your own eyes. As for revenge, it is still far away. Subai slowly sat down on the steps, took out a cigarette, lit it, but did not smoke it, but simply held it between his fingers. It's not your fault. The advantage they have over you is just their age. The being in the coffin comforted him, even though he himself knew that the comfort at this time was basically meaningless, and it made him appear more, it's very hypocritical, because he still needs Sudbai's help with one more thing. Sudbai smiled and said, I just want to ask you one thing. Is it safe in this ghost place? He stretched out his hand and pointed around. This was Sudbai's question, and it was also what Sudbai wanted to know most urgently now, because Sudbai had no choice but to find that as long as he was outside, he would inevitably fall into those situations. Sudbai was disgusted by this feeling of being out of control due to personal calculations. You are not a sailor sailing in the sea, you are just a puppet being played with, and anyone who likes can come and play with you, and make you spin around. Although I don't know where the bottom line of broadcasting's omniscience and omnipotence lies, one thing I can guarantee is that there is no place in the entire real world that has received as much attention from broadcasting as here. Then what should I do now? Sudbai gently put out the cigarette butt with his fingertips, then raised his head and looked up. Above, there was the dark wall. Now, it seems that I can only pray in my heart, is the terror broadcast supreme. This is not cowardice, because the broadcast is indeed your hope now, the person in the coffin said with a slight smile, which was very strange, because when this person seemed to speak, his tone began to become more obvious, unlike before, his voice sounded like it was coming from a sound processor, flat and stiff. Then, can I stay here? Sudbai looked around. There were 12 coffins here, only one had someone lying in it, and the other 11 were empty. Do you want to live here? The person in the coffin was silent for a moment. That might become the second me. Going out is actually a kind of torture for me. Regarding this matter, in fact, even if the lychee episode didn't occur, Sudbai would have had this idea for a long time. After all, when he jumped out of the spiral nest with Jixiang in his arms, he didn't hesitate much. You can live here, but it's difficult to get out, the presence in the coffin reminded. Once you occupy one of the coffins, it means that you will bind this place, which is similar to signing a contract. A kind of contract and agreement. Party B is you, Sudbai, and Party A is the broadcaster. This agreement does not even require a notary, because Party A can fully ensure that this agreement will take effect and continue. Why does this make people feel like selling their souls to the devil? Sudbai coughed, just like Count Dracula. Human beings just regard those who are good to them as gods, and those who are not good to them are collectively called devils. You mean that the radio is God, and the care it bestows on this world makes me feel grateful? Then it depends on your own choice. Sudbai was silent for a while, and then said, actually, I have no choice. Jixiang came back from the underworld at this time, and seemed to have vented the resentment caused by the recovery of its soul and memory. However, its eyes were no longer as clear and bright as before, but instead became very deep. This feeling, even Ruyi, who has stayed at the place of enlightenment and never left, is not as good as him. Sudbai looked at Jixiang. He felt that Jixiang should have heard his previous conversation with the coffin, because Jixiang had fully recovered at this time, so its perception and sensitivity must have also recovered, although it had been slowly recovering before. He came, but at such a short distance, he did not deliberately block the conversation between himself and the person in the coffin, so Jixiang must have known his plan. But Jixiang didn't choose to object, he just knelt down in front of Ruyi just like before. Probably, even this cat himself knows that even if he goes out crying and looking for the little guy, he can't find it. Those few people can't find any trace of them at all, and they can't even find the radio, let alone Itsit and Subai. Jixiang is like a narcissistic nobleman, but in the face of reality, he also chooses to lower his head temporarily and chooses to lie dormant. The will of fate rolled down, almost making people unable to breathe. It crushed Sudbai's struggle and also crushed the cat's aloofness. In fact, neither Sudbai nor Jixiang had a choice or fault. If they had to find a fault, it would be who kept them in the weak position for such a long time. The weak will naturally be plotted, taken advantage of, and fooled. No choice, really no choice. Sudbai walked to an empty coffin, reached out and knocked on the lid, making a dull sound. "By the way, I still owe you a condition," Sudbai asked. "No need to say anything." Clang. The lid inside the coffin was completely suspended, and the figure of a fat middle-aged man slowly stood up. "The only condition for the end of the contract is for another listener to willingly take your place and lie here. This is the condition I wanted to say before." Sudbai nodded and smiled. No wonder the other party didn't even mention the conditions before, and didn't even ask whether Sudbai agreed to his conditions, but just spent a huge price to help Sudbai recover his soul. In fact, whether his conditions are stated or not is Sudbai's inevitable choice. But Sudbai still raised his middle finger to the fat figure and said, "Bitch, goods."